can get this demon out.
It is 11 a.m. on a Monday morning in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Time once again for Southern Fried Sports on your home for University of Alabama Athletics. Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, part of the 247sports.com network. Your trusty, if not talented, host of the program, which, as always, brought to you by Peterbrook Chocolatier. It is officially Valentine's Week. That's coming up on Friday, February the 14th. So as we've encouraged you strongly here in the last few weeks, make that phone call today. You still have time to pre-order those hand-dipped strawberries at 205-752-0211. That's going to put you in touch with Heather, Emily, the rest of the gang out there in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. They'll get you taken care of over the phone. Easy peasy. No fuss, no muss, or whatever that saying is. Look, I didn't bring the weather, by the way, back with me from Southern California. Was able to spend a few days out on the central coast of the Golden State, taking in our Rainbow Wahine in women's basketball action. The University of Hawaii had a 2-game roadie out on the West Coast, so I was able to sprint out west. And the weather was just incredible out there. High of 65 pretty much every day. Nothing but blue skies, whether it was San Luis Obispo or down in Santa Barbara for a couple of days over the weekend. Gorgeous. You can see why Oprah Winfrey has sunk about $150 million in real estate in that Santa Barbara county area. It's incredible. But I unfortunately I did not have enough room in the carry-on baggage to bring that sunshine back.
My bad, I didn't interrupt. But you couldn't spare to pay a little bit extra just to bring a little of the sunshine back?
Yeah, Southwest is good about allowing that first bag on for free. Their competitors aren't so much about that. But yeah, even if I had checked a bag, I don't think I could have gotten that weather in there. But it was a fun trip, and as you heard there, I'm joined as always by the executive producer of Southern Fried Sports, Josh Smith, who together we do combine to form the 60-minute man of sports talk radio. Yeah, Josh, I wasn't able to make that happen. I'll tell you what I did bring back, though. I did bring back a couple W's for that for those Rainbow Wahine. 2-0 road trip for our gals. Yes. Told you Friday we had the Thursday night win over Cal Poly up in San Luis Obispo. Beautiful area up there. Pismo Beach, right there on the Pacific coast. And then we followed that up Saturday with an afternoon with a matinee tilt against the Gauchos of UC Santa Barbara. And we go in there and we take a 12-point decision from UCSB. Just an incredible campus, too. A campus that's similar to Pepperdine and Malibu. Probably not as sort of scenic because Malibu sits up basically on the cliffs up there above the Pacific Ocean. But right on the Pacific is UC Santa Barbara as well. So it wouldn't be a bad place to go to college, If you're looking for some scenery and some great weather, either of those would work just fine. So fresh from the West Coast, and it is a winners and losers Monday here on the program. We are wide open throughout the 60 minutes that we're with you. You can join us at 205-342-9904. That is the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line. We'll take your winners and losers. Had some winners as it relates to the University of Alabama Athletic Department. Big Power of Pink weekend in Tuscaloosa. Friday night, you had the Alabama gymnastics team posting its season best score of 197.550. Its highest score, in fact, since the 2016 season. So Dana Duckworth's team improving, it seems, on a weekly basis. Been pretty consistent on the mat, but 2 straight wins now for Alabama gymnastics on a big night to celebrate the legacy, in large part, of former coach Sarah Patterson, who basically got this whole thing started with the Power of Pink in the Alabama Athletic Department, raising awareness for breast cancer, research, and hopefully encouraging some donations to eventually lead to a cure for breast cancer. Yesterday at Coleman Coliseum, the Chocolate Lady and Tay-Tay were in attendance for the Alabama women's basketball team's 4-point win over the Auburn Tigers, a season sweep in the regular season for Alabama women's basketball over Auburn. First time that's happened since 2002. Yeah. So, yeah, another strong Power of Pink performance from the UA ladies on Sunday. You had some basketball in Athens, Georgia, as we know. Do or die type situation for the Alabama men's team, and the Crimson Tide gets the job done. And I'm so thankful for how far technology has come, because when you're basically 1,500, couple thousand miles away, and you can jump on your smartphone and you can put in those AirPods and you can watch your daughter play college basketball in Santa Barbara, California, while simultaneously keeping up and watching the Alabama men play the University of Georgia in Athens. Technology isn't all bad. I think there's certainly some areas of technology that have worked to the detriment of our society. But in terms of sports content consumption, I think we can all agree technology's been a hell of a thing here.
Most definitely, Trav. I mean, I wasn't at the same altitude as you, but moving in to my new apartment over the weekend, just didn't have the Wi-Fi, didn't have the cable, but did have the Watch ESPN app and was able to just keep up through that. I mean, even with softball as well.
Yeah, I mean, everything. You really could keep track of everything over the weekend. And the Alabama men with a much-needed win, 105-102. What a wild Saturday in SEC men's hoops. You had 3 overtime games, including a game featuring Alabama's next 2 opponents, Auburn and LSU, down at Auburn Arena. The Tigers of Auburn somehow get it done, coming from a large deficit in the final minute of regulation to push that game into overtime. And Javon McCormick saves the day for the Auburn Tigers there in the final second with a runner that banged around a little bit on that goal before dropping through. No one more happy to see that shot drop than Samir Doughty, the Auburn guard who had the major mistake of a turnover that led to LSU's go-ahead bucket there late in overtime before McCormick performed his heroics. But some really fun basketball in the SEC these days. And dare I say, I never would have said this 5 or 6 years ago, but SEC basketball is far more easier on the eyes these days than ACC basketball. I never would have said that even 5 years ago. I'm very much on record in the past of being an ACC basketball snob. In just the same way that a lot of us are that way about SEC football, I've always been that way about ACC basketball. If there were games on that I didn't have to watch, but I just wanted to watch them, and it was an SEC game or an ACC game 5 years ago that was my option, I would watch the ACC game every time. If it was Wake Forest Clemson, I would have watched that over Auburn LSU 5 years ago. That's just the way it was. That was the landscape. 5 years later, for me at least, it's done a 180. SEC basketball not only increasing in strength, maybe not as much this year, looking like a 5-bid league instead of 6, 7, or 8, but just game in and game out, entertaining basketball. It really, really is. So you had the 3 overtime games. Auburn gets the job done against LSU. LSU coming off an 0-2 week now and squandering that lead in the SEC standings. You got a 3-way tie atop the SEC teams standings there. Now you've got Auburn, Kentucky, and LSU all tied at 8-2. Again, Alabama with a much-needed win over the weekend. Kyra Lewis with some heroics, 37 points. But you got some nice contributions in that game from the Alabama perspective. John Petty, the 3-point shot continues to be a bit of a struggle for John Petty of late, but he still gives you 21 points. Beetle Bolden off the bench gives you 35 minutes. This is a guy who hadn't been able to hold down food for much of the last month, and he gives you 35 minutes off the bench, gives you 11 points. Very strong performance from Beetle Bolden. And you took care of the basketball a little bit better on Saturday. 14 turnovers for Alabama in the game, but didn't lose the points off turnover battle. Actually won it by 7 points. Did lose points in the paint by a little bit. But Kyra Lewis Jr., I don't think it would be a reach to say he was the best player on the floor by a pretty sizable margin on Saturday. Anthony Edwards is the guy we're going to continue to talk about right on through this summer's NBA draft, and understandably so. Kid's a prodigy. This is a guy who reclassified from the class of 2021 to go ahead and play his senior year in 2019-2020. Now, Anthony Edwards is 18 years old. It's not like Anthony Edwards is doing this as a 17-year-old like Kyra did as a freshman. But still, an extraordinary young talent in Anthony Edwards, but Kyra Lewis Jr. was the man in Athens on Saturday. 37 points, could have been a 40-point game pretty easily. Kyra missed 5 free throws, and I'm not going to hammer him too much for that because Kyra played 42 minutes on the basketball for the most part. But it was important to get the type of effort you got to from some of your complimentary players. Javian Davis with 13 and 8. That's not what you're getting night in and night out. So it took a little bit of something from pretty much everyone to get the job done in the 3-point win over the Georgia Bulldogs. And it doesn't get any easier for Nate Oates' team. Not with a road trip to Auburn coming up on Wednesday evening. That's a 6 o'clock tip. That game will air on ESPN2, by the way. Auburn now a perfect 16-0 at home this season after that comeback win over LSU on Saturday. Alabama looking to try to reestablish itself down the road when it gets another opportunity on its home floor. That won't be until Saturday's matchup with LSU here in Tuscaloosa. So if you're Alabama and you're looking at this week and you're sitting there now at 13 and 10 overall, and you're looking at the potential for, a split this week. If you're being realistic, if you can get a split of the road game at Auburn and the home game at LSU, you're 14 and 11 at that point. You're 6 and 6 in the league, and you're looking at a stretch over the final 3 weeks of the regular season that's manageable from a schedule standpoint. Not that this team can sort of go ahead and pencil in wins against anyone, as we've seen here in the last couple of weeks. But if you're 14 and 11 coming out of this week, 6 and 6 in the league, you still have home games with A&M, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt, and road games at Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and Missouri. I mean, there's a possibility there to go through those final 6 at 4 and 2, right? You go 4 and 2 through that stretch, you're 18 and 13 entering the SEC tournament, and you realistically still have a chance to make the NCAA tournament because the metrics still look pretty good. When you talk about net and you talk about KenPom, I believe Alabama's net ranking as of this morning was 42. So, that puts you in the conversation. But again, a tough week coming up from a competition standpoint. It wasn't a great weekend, by the way, for UA softball, although Patrick Murphy's team got some great news earlier today. Alabama softball goes down to Tallahassee, goes 1-3 for the weekend, wins the opening game of its 4 contests down there at Florida State, beating North Carolina, but then drops an absolute heartbreaker in the second game on Friday against homestanding Florida State. 7-2 lead going into the bottom of the 7th. Florida State scores 5 to tie it, including 4 of those coming on a grand slam to tie the game before going on to win it 8-7 in extras. Alabama then run-ruled by Florida State in the first game on Saturday before dropping another one, blowing another late lead against North Carolina in the final game of those 4 down there in Tally. So a 1-3 start to the 2020 season for the Alabama softball team. But again, good news this morning. Abby Dorr, assignee for the 2020 class, actually has already enrolled at Alabama and was awaiting word on her immediate eligibility for the 2020 season. Well, this morning we learned via Alabama softball that Abby Dorr has been granted immediate eligibility. She's good to go, and that's big on multiple levels for this Alabama softball team. First of all, you needed depth at the catcher position to begin with. And what you didn't want to do is spend an entire season putting Bailey Hemphill back there. You would much rather have Bailey in a situation where she's not enduring the wear and tear of catching 45, 50 games a season while also trying to give you that offensive production you've grown accustomed to. So with Dorr being eligible now, you would think she becomes a real factor behind the plate, freeing up Bailey Hemphill to play first base, DH, whatever you want to do with her. And that's good news. That's good news for this Alabama softball team, which needs it coming off that 1-3 weekend. And also, similar to the Alabama men's basketball team, not an easy week coming up for Murph and his ladies. Headed down to that St. Pete Clearwater Elite Invitational, where, among others, Alabama will face Washington and UCLA coming up later in the week. Washington on Thursday, UCLA on Friday. Both those games have scheduled first pitch times for 3 o'clock Central. Both of those games will air, by the way, on ESPNU. So there you go. That kind of sets the table for you from the Alabama athletics viewpoint. We'll get into some XFL thoughts. What did you think of the XFL? Was the XFL a big winner from the weekend? Is it too early to say that the XFL is a big winner as it gets underway with its league here in early to mid-February? We'll talk some XFL with you. We'll probably look at revisiting, Josh and I on Friday, we sort of outlined 10 Alabama players for the 2020 season that are going to need to step forward here during spring drills, throughout the summer, throughout fall camp in August, right into that 2020 season. Well, that story, I dropped that update on BamaOnline.com first thing this morning. If you haven't seen it yet, it's a free read. You can go to BamaOnline.com. It is on the front page right now. 10 who need to step up in 2020. We'll revisit that list coming up a little bit later in the program. We'll also talk about some assistant coach movement among Saban disciples who are now head coaches. It's been kind of amazing to watch all of this sort of shell game involving assistant coaches and staffers going from one Saban disciple to another, it looks like, within the SEC and beyond. We'll get into some of that too. And it's supposed to be a big day for Tua Tagovailoa today. Alabama had 10 combine invitees that you learned about late last week. Tua Tagovailoa obviously among those 10. But you remember, Tua, while making the rounds during the Super Bowl media availability and the ramp up to Super Bowl 54, indicated that today, February the 10th, would be a day in which he would get another good look at that hip from his medical team, have a better idea of where he's at in his recovery, and exactly how much that could impact the 2020 draft, or at least the evaluation process as we get ready to move toward the combine and pro days and individual workouts, private workouts, and those things that are the mile markers leading up to a draft. We're going to head to a break. Donald is just checking in. Donald, if you hang on, we'll get to you as soon as Southern Fried Sports returns on a Monday, presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier on Tide 100.9 FM, right after this.
100.9. For more coverage of Alabama football, visit us at Tide100.9.com or download the free Tide 100.9 app.
The Crimson Tide will not be denied.
By the way, I guess I got to see Parasite, even though I'm not big on subtitles. Kind of cleaned up last night, didn't it? Our soundtrack of the day, by the way, our playlist of the day, by the way, the soundtrack from the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I did see that one. I did see Quentin Tarantino's latest was nominated in multiple categories last night. Came up a little bit empty. Brad Pitt, I guess, did get that Best Supporting Actor nod for his role there in Once Upon a Time. I thought Leo DiCaprio was great as Rick Dalton in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Thought he was outstanding. I think I saw 3 of the flicks that were prominently nominated. I saw Joker, I saw The Irishman, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I'm a little bit limited there. Of those 3, I would have gone with Once Upon a Time as my favorite of the 3, and I would have gone with Leonardo DiCaprio as Best Actor over Joaquin Phoenix, although I thought Joaquin Phoenix was tremendous in Joker. And I'm obviously a huge Scorsese fan, so while I enjoyed The Irishman, I have to go with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as my pick there of those 3. I thought Joe Pesci, too, in a supporting role, certainly would have been deserving of an Oscar for his portrayal in The Irishman. Did an outstanding job. Kind of, a move away from what you typically see from Joe Pesci, certainly in mafia, organized crime type flicks. That wasn't Tommy that Joe Pesci played from Goodfellas in The Irishman, to be sure. 205-342-9904. That's the Peterbrook Chocolatier studio line. Let's go there right now and check in with Donald on a Monday morning. A rainy, thunderous, lightning-filled Monday here in Tuscaloosa. Donald, how you doing?
Travis, good morning. Hope you had a great weekend, buddy.
It was a great one, man.
Yeah, it was. Just got to ask you a question. I know I'm aware of what the softball team did this weekend, but what in the world's going on with them? I mean, they were playing players, about 5, half their lineup during all the games down there were players that were brand spanking new there, either transfers or freshmen. And I know that with Morgan, the third baseman, I was told she's got academic issues. But what about some of the others? I mean, had they had some injuries or something like that, or what? Yeah.
Maddie Morgan wasn't available. You're right. She's typically going to be your starting third baseman, so that was a change. You also had the injury to Claire Jenkins in the offseason, your shortstop, who's out for the year with the knee injury. So you had Skylar Wallace playing shortstop. Alexis Mack is a transfer from Oregon that you saw there in the middle of the infield some there at second base. And I think Alexis Mack offensively to go along with Skylar Wallace and Alyssa Brown, depending on how you want to work that trio, very potent group there in terms of speed, first and foremost, ability to run the bases. But, yeah, you're still working through some things, especially with no Maddie Morgan there at third base and shifting Skylar Wallace to shortstop and the catching situation, as I talked about earlier, got some good news earlier today. Abby Dorr, the freshman, is immediately eligible, so she'll be able to give you something behind the plate, beginning with this weekend's trip down to the St. Pete Clearwater area. So it's not unusual for Murph either from a pitching perspective. When you got 4 arms like he's got, he's going to try some different things. Now, where it can hurt you is down the road. You lose some of these games and you start looking at seeding for the postseason. That could come back to haunt you a little bit. But, Murph he's not afraid, especially early in the season, to try some different things. And to be fair, it's not like he doesn't have some established performers in the circle. Crystal Goodman comes in a 5-run game against Florida State on Friday. Based on what you've seen from her in the previous season, you expect her to be able to nail that down. And even if she can't, you bring Montana Fouts back in and think she's going to be able to work out of it, and give Florida State credit. They came up with the big blow there in the 7th and seemed like it sort of just carried over into Saturday's early game, and Florida State really dominated that one. But, Murph's working some different things right now, some out of necessity, some out of just kind of a discovery process that a lot of coaches like to go through early in the season.
Well, the thing about it is Crystal Goodman only pitched that one inning the entire weekend. I mean,
yeah,
they were. I mean, Lexi Kilthorpe pitched 3 of the 4 games.
She was very involved. Yeah.
And so that makes me wonder what's going on with the pitching staff. Now, I will say this. The game that they lost where they blew the 5-run lead, Murphy tinkering with the lineup blew up in his face in that game because he hit – Cornell actually got pinch hit for somebody during the game. So they burned her early in the game, and at the end of the game when things blew up, he didn't have anybody available. And then Kilthorpe pitched the first game. And so in terms of his tinkering, I agree with you on that. He does that. He's been doing that for years. But in this particular case, it blew up in his face because he didn't have an extra arm that he could have used maybe in that game at the end when needed. And Goodman didn't, like you said, Goodman got lit up as well. But Goodman not pitching the rest of the weekend, that's what bothers me because, like you said, you know, they count on her and she's got that experience. But so it makes me wonder if there's some injuries going on there that we don't know about. And but I'm not worried about the offense. But the thing that bothered me the most was the defense. I mean, they committed 8 or 9 errors in 4 games, and that's bothersome as well. Now, granted, like I said, there's a lot of things that are changing, as you mentioned, the catcher situation, which really didn't come into play a whole lot. Hemphill actually had a pretty good weekend behind the plate in terms of the way she played.
Oh, she can do it. She can do it. You know, I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's just, you know, you'd rather not put too much of that on her because of her value as a hitter. And you're right, defensively, you commit 9 errors in 4 games. That's obviously not the start you're looking for. But again, some things you're trying to figure out up the middle of that defense in the infield. You know, a little bit of a change right now at third base, at least until you get Maddie Morgan back in there. And so not all of it totally unexpected, but sure, when you've got the lead in the bottom of the 7th in 2 games, large leads with that pitching staff, if you're Murph, you expect to pretty much be able to go to any of 4 of those arms that you have and close games out. They weren't able to do it.
Well, the thing about the positive I want to take out of it is this. Unlike teams like LSU and Florida and Georgia, them comparing to SEC teams, Alabama's schedule will help them as we go along because by playing good teams like they played this weekend, and North Carolina was a very good team, I might add, they know what they need to work on. They know what they need to fix, whereas you couldn't really maybe not see that up close if you had played somebody like a Florida A&M or a Howard like Georgia and LSU did. So, or Detroit Mercy like Florida State did. But the thing is, though, they know what they need to work on. They know what their capabilities are a lot better today than they did before last weekend. So hopefully this week is tough tournament, but they'll go down there and give a good showing and good accounting of themselves, and they'll get better because, I mean, it don't get no easier as the schedule goes along. So, but that's okay. Murphy scheduled it that way, but I think he obviously knows the capabilities and the potential of this team going forward. So it's disappointing, but it's just one weekend out of a 60 or 70 game schedule. So
long season, no doubt about it, Donald. No doubt.
Yep. All right. Well, Travis, it's good talking to you, buddy. I'll let you get off and let somebody else get on. And y'all have a wonderful day. And once again, thank you for what you do.
Hey, thanks, Donald. We always appreciate the call here on Southern Fried Sports. 205-342-9904. If you'd like to check in, we'd love to hear from you. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much standard operating procedure for early in the season for a lot of teams when you're talking about the Alabama softball team here. Just 1 weekend into the campaign. And, you know, absolutely. I think the upcoming weekend will be just as telling. And you're still a very talented team, but that doesn't mean you don't have things to work out, especially early in the season. And good bit of that triggered by the injury to Claire Jenkins at shortstop and the unavailability of Maddie Morgan there. So you're starting shortstop projected and you're starting third baseman projected, you don't have in a 4-game setup against 2 very capable teams, including one of those who are ranked among the top 10 teams in all of college softball. Things happen in those scenarios. We're going to head to a break. When we come back, more Southern Fried Sports on a Monday, presented by Peterbrook Chocolatier, right here on Tide 100.9 FM right after this.
And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know. Whoa, whoa, whoa. God bless you, please, Mrs. Robinson. Heaven holds a place for those who pray. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, hey, hey. We'd like to know a little bit about you for our files. We'd like to help you learn to help yourself. Look around you, all you see are sympathetic eyes. Stroll around the grounds until you feel at home. And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson.
The assistant coach / staffer merry-go-round is in full effect on this Monday. And much of it involves Nick Saban disciples who are now head coaches around the Southeastern Conference, and even a program out to the west in Boulder, Colorado. If you haven't seen or heard sort of the happenings on the front of assistant coaches and staffers here in the last few days, well, here's a little bit of an idea of what's been going on. And it's been, knock on some wood, Josh, relatively quiet. There you go. 3 times. You got it. It's been relatively quiet in Tuscaloosa. I mean, you did have Brian Baker going out as the defensive line coach at Alabama, moving on to the Indianapolis Colts once the decision was made that Freddie Roach would be coming home to coach the Alabama defensive line. So that's pretty much been the extent of it for Alabama to this point. To this point is all we'll say. But elsewhere, man, Jeremy Pruitt especially up at Tennessee has been impacted. Just in the last 12 hours or so, we've heard that Tennessee defensive line coach Tracy Rocker is moving on. Director of player personnel for Tennessee, Drew Hughes, who worked here at Alabama in the past, is also moving on. Both those guys, Rocker and Hughes, going from Tennessee and Jeremy Pruitt to another Saban disciple in Columbia, South Carolina, and Will Muschamp. Meanwhile, Muschamp is losing a former Alabama staffer, and Matt Lindsay, who is going from South Carolina as the director of player personnel to Ole Miss to work for a former Alabama assistant coach in Lane Kiffin. Lindsay going to be the Rebels' new general manager under Lane Kiffin. Meanwhile, with Tracy Rocker leaving Tennessee, another former Alabama staffer, who is now a head coach at the University of Colorado, Mel Tucker, is losing Jimmy Brumbaugh to Jeremy Pruitt and the University of Tennessee. And did I mention that James Coley left Georgia and Kirby Smart, former Alabama assistant coach, to go work for Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. And Jimbo, of course, a former Nick Saban assistant coach. Yeah. Kevin Shearer, by the way, has left Tennessee. He, too, a former Alabama staffer under Nick Saban. He has left Jeremy Pruitt to go to the New York Giants, where he will work for another former Alabama assistant staffer in Joe Judge. And just a few moments ago, we hear Chris Rump, a former Alabama assistant, also on the move. He is going to the Houston Texans. Yeah, making the move to the National Football League. Other than that, hadn't been a lot going on here in the last couple of days on the assistant / staffer level, where former Alabama assistants under Nick Saban are concerned. 205-342 9904. That is the number to call if you'd like to jump on board with us on a Winners and Losers Monday here on the program. The XFL being talked about as a winner from over the weekend. That opening weekend of the XFL. Hey, look, the crowds were fairly modest at the 4 games on opening weekend of the 2020 XFL season. I've told you many times before that any of these teams that have access to MLS stadiums in their respective cities, that's where they should be playing their football games. You saw it with DC. You saw it with the DC team on Saturday. You didn't see it with the New York team yesterday, and it looked awful to have 15, 16,000 people in MetLife Stadium, which holds 70,000 plus. And you've got MLS options there in New York City that you can co-occupy if you're that XFL team. In fact, before I left Los Angeles yesterday morning to come home, I made a short drive over to the LA Memorial Coliseum. Had to just sort of check in, make a little drive around the complex there. When you're talking about museums of American sports, the LA Memorial Coliseum certainly ranks chief on that list. So I go over there, I make the drive around the complex, and now right there where the LA Sports Arena used to be, in that same area, in that same complex, you've got the Banc of California MLS Soccer Stadium, home to the LA Football Club. And it sits basically adjacent to the Coliseum. And, man, it's nice. I would much rather go watch a football game at the Banc of California MLS Stadium than I would in the vast, cavernous in some ways, LA Memorial Coliseum. Now, from a tradition-rich perspective, yeah, the Coliseum, you got to go there and watch a game. But as far as sort of sight lines and the quaint nature and the atmosphere that some of these smaller venues can create above and beyond anything that a place like the Coliseum can, no. Give me the MLS stadiums every day of the week. So the crowds weren't great, but apparently the television ratings were solid. We've heard that before, though, with these sort of late winter into spring football leagues. We heard it just last year, right, with the AAF. As we've talked about before, though, a little more cash behind this XFL league than there was with the AAF. The AAF essentially just jumped into the ocean with no life preserver in hope someone would come by in a dinghy and save the league. It didn't happen. And so the AAF didn't even complete its one and only season of existence. The XFL with Vince McMahon and his support, a little different deal there. And so the ratings look pretty good. I'm hesitant to go ahead and sort of green light the long-term viability of this league. I want to see more. I think it fits a nice point in the sports year calendar. You know, a short season, 10 games, 10 regular season games and a championship. It shouldn't get overshadowed too much by baseball coming around on the calendar. You're going to have golf becoming more and more a part of the weekly regimen as we get into March and the Players' Championship and then into April with the Masters. So it's sort of fitting that slot in the sports calendar year quite nicely. And as long as people want to bet on sports and as long as people want to play fantasy sports, there will be that sort of core group that the XFL can count on in terms of fan base and more than anything, eyes on televisions and mobile devices and streaming content, games from that perspective. It's almost like if you were going to buy an existing bar, you know, you'd want to know, okay, who are my regulars? Who are going to be the 20, 25, 30 customers almost every day I can count on at the bar? Well, between gambling and fantasy football, those are the people that you can pretty much count on. Beyond that, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And I thought the broadcasts themselves were great. And I know there's been a lot of talk about, well, why didn't the NFL, why didn't the networks that have NFL rights, why don't they take this? Well, the NFL isn't going to give you this kind of access. I mean, it's wide open to Fox and ABC, ESPN in terms of what's accessible in game You've got sideline reporters over the weekend going up to kickers after they miss field goals as soon as they come off the field, putting a mic in their face saying, hey, what happened? Yeah. I don't think the NFL is ready to expose its stars and its coaches to that point.
But wouldn't the fans love it, though?
Oh, yeah, the fans would absolutely love it. And perhaps there will be some of it that comes from this that is incorporated, that is allowed to be incorporated into NFL broadcast. But I think there's still going to be a line there that the NFL doesn't want to put itself all the way out there like the XFL does. But it was cool to see guys like Bradley Silve on Saturday with a pick six, the former Alabama cornerback doing his thing. Some other guys, some other coaches. Look, you could have given me the dead or alive test for Jerry Glanville, and I don't know if I would have gotten it right. But there's Jerry Glanville yesterday as the defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Vipers. So we saw Jerry Glanville, the big, well-known Elvis fan, Jerry Glanville. Jordan Ta'amu, the former Ole Miss quarterback, playing for St. Louis yesterday. So it's cool to see kind of what's happened to some of these players and coaches from years past. Nick Fitzgerald, a backup quarterback to Jordan Ta'amu in St. Louis, I guess it was. So there was some good stuff. Again, though, we'll see. I'm going to give it a few more weeks before I'm ready to say, oh, yeah, XFL here to stay. Going to step aside for a final break. When we come back, we'll revisit those 10 Alabama players we were talking about on Friday that need to take a step forward for Alabama football in 2020. We'll do that more when Southern Fried Sports returns on a Monday on Tide 100.9 FM right after this. Back with more of a Monday edition of Southern Fried Sports right here on your home for University of Alabama Athletics. Tide 100.9 FM. Travis Reier, Senior Analyst for BamaOnline.com with you each and every weekday morning from 11 a.m. until noon. Wanted to get into these 10 Alabama players who need to take a step forward for the 2020 football season. You can find that piece, by the way, right now at BamaOnline.com. 10 who need to step up in 2020. It's a free read. Go ahead and do that at BamaOnline.com. I'll get things going with sophomore outside linebacker King Wakuda. You've got the top two spots in that outside linebacker rotation that are wide open now with the departures of Anthony Jennings and also Terrell Lewis. Wakuda, a raw and rangy prospect, spent the 2019 season getting coached up by outside linebackers coach Sal Sunseri. The physical attributes of Wakuda are very obvious. He's long, he's twitchy. He certainly has the look of what you want in today's edge defender. Opportunity awaits King Wakuda, and he needs to take advantage of the opportunity this spring because, as we talked about on Friday, a very strong injection of talent, five-star talent, multiple five stars have made their way on campus as early enrollees for Alabama at the outside linebacker position. I'll give you another one here. Will Reichard, the place kicker punter who sustained the bizarre injury against Southern Miss last September on a kickoff, subsequently re-injured that hip in trying to come back from the initial injury. So his initial season at Alabama was limited to just 5 games. He converted 4 of 7 field goals and averaged 38 yards per punt in limited action in 2019. What you did like a lot from Will Reichard was that his kickoffs were pretty much going for touchbacks. 22 of his 29 kickoffs last season resulted in a touchback. We'll see what kind of workload he takes on moving forward. He was trending in a good direction health-wise by the Citrus Bowl. We'll see if he continues with that into March and April and exactly how much is placed on him as a two-way guy at the punter and place-kicking spots. Defensively, Jordan Battle, As a true freshman, you saw him situationally in the dime package in 2019. You got Xavier McKinney moving on. You got Jared Maiden moving on from those safety spots. Even a guy like Shaheem Carter was sort of a safety net. If you needed him, he could play safety. So Jordan Battle looks to be very much an option to work with that first group when spring practice gets underway in March, just next month. Kind of crazy to think about. But Jordan Battle, a guy that I would say projects more as an every down safety. Maybe you'll see him get a look in some of the dime stuff at money and the like, but he looks more like an every down guy at safety. Offensive line, this one was a little tricky because you had a couple different ways you could go with it. Evan Neal would be an obvious choice, but he's already been a starter. That has more to do with where Evan Neal will line up in 2020. Does he stay inside at guard? Do they kick him out to right tackle to fill the vacancy left behind by the departure of Jedrick Wills to the NFL draft? So I went with Emil Ekiyor, a third-year player, an interior offensive lineman. If the decision is made to move Neal out to tackle, you're going to have an opening there inside, you would think. Landon Dickerson, though, also a guy who could potentially kick outside to tackle. And maybe it's Darian Dalcourt that steps in at center in that scenario. But I went with Ekiyor. He competed heavily for a starting job in 2019. The table would seem to be set, assuming Neal does move outside. And so we'll see what happens there. At wide receiver, John Mechie, I'm going to go with there. Obviously, with Jerry Jeudy and also Henry Ruggs III moving on, you got a third spot there with Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle coming back. And as much of this three wide receiver set stuff that you see from Alabama these days, if you're that third receiver, you're essentially a starter. And so John Mechie, a strong performance a year ago as an early enrollee in the spring. We'll see if he can carry that over into his second full year on campus. Back to the defense we'll go. How about Josh Jobe at corner? You know, he's kind of flirted with nailing down starting type roles each of the last 2 years. They've sort of evaded him, eluded him in each of those 2 seasons. He's had brief stretches where he's looked like he's going to be that third guy at corner, and then it's kind of transitioned to somewhere else. Well, you know, again, with Shaheem Carter moving on, with Trayvon Diggs moving on, you return Patrick Surtain the second at corner. You bring in a mid-year enrollee from the junior college ranks in Ronald Williams. Even with that, you got to think this is the prime opportunity for Josh Jobe to sort of live up to the expectation that has been there really for sure over the last year, but certainly going into his third year. That's what you'll be looking for from Josh Jobe. I'll go back to offense with Jalil Billingsley at tight end for another one of these guys. You add Carl Tucker as a graduate transfer to go along with Miller Forstall as your veteran presences now in that tight end room. But there's a place for Billingsley to still be a significant player at tight end. And even if it's not so much in 2020, with Tucker and Forstall having just a year of eligibility remaining, Billingsley looks like a guy that when you look ahead to 2021 for sure, you're going to need him. So I'll go Jalil Billingsley there. Quarterback Mac Jones, not so much to prove after going 3-1 in starts in 2019, but obviously the competition kicks up a notch or two with Bryce Young, the top prospect for the 2020 recruiting cycle nationally, joining the mix here in January. Mac Jones is going to be the SEC's returning passing leader in terms of rating. 186.8 was his quarterback rating for 2019, and that's with 4 starts. So this isn't a situation where, he played 70 snaps like a Miles Brennan at LSU. Mac Jones is going to make that list. And I'll go Daniel Wright at safety as well. You've got DeMarco Ellams that's going to be in that mix. Additionally, we talked about the departures of Maiden and McKinney and the opportunity that presents for some other guys like Daniel Wright. You saw him a little bit in the Citrus Bowl. McKinney had to come off the field there in a first and goal situation. Wright thrust into the mix. Michigan hits the tight end for a touchdown. So Daniel Wright going to have an opportunity for sure, though, to compete there with a young guy like DeMarco Ellams And you think the experience for Daniel Wright going into his, fourth year in the program, I guess, third or fourth year in the program should help him out. Finally, DJ Dale on that defensive line. And you could really choose from Dale, LeBrian Ray, Christian Barmore, Byron Young, Justin Aboybe. But I went with DJ Dale because it still starts in the middle. It's tough to be a dominant defense if you don't have that guy on the point. Alabama, because of injuries in large part to Dale in 2019, really didn't have that dude and paid a price for it, especially with true freshman inside linebackers working behind that nose tackle. So DJ Dale, assuming he can get back to full health, a big, big piece for this Alabama defense in 2020. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of Southern Fried Sports. Thanks to Josh Smith for producing the show. The Lunch Whistle today brought to you by Southern Ale House, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North. Until 11 a.m. on Tuesday, have a great rest of your Monday, everybody.